Right, and as I said at the very beginning, we'll be speaking about or a call by Egypt for world unity to confront this pandemic, this global threat, and an issue that is not anymore luxury, but rather it is a must. Unity among the communities, among nations, is the only way to get out of this crisis. We have with us for discussion Dr. Cherif Amir, Professor of International Relations. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me here ask you first how you evaluate the proactive and precautionary measures that were taken by the country so far in order to be able to deal with the coronavirus?
Well, as far as for Egypt, we are doing the maximum because we are trying not to, it's very hard for us because we are trying to keep the economy going on, and at the same time, the priority, as President Sisi said, is the health of the people. And both cases are related to each other, because if we have the sickness everywhere, the people won't be able to work and product. So we are in a difficult situation, but we must do the maximum for the protection, because we know that we have already some industries were harmed, like the tourism, it's harmed. The exportation and importation, well, the Suez Canal is doing very good, fortunately. We are benefiting from also the restrictions were lifted for Egyptian products to the EU, but our precautions here in Egypt, I think that the citizens should do better than that. The people have to keep in mind that the pandemic, the COVID-19 is still around. There is no need for gatherings. There is no need for any presence in the streets without any emergency. Of course, we know that many people have to work, have to go, and they have their daily bread, especially in Egypt. But I think that the government is giving all the time the numbers, so the people will try and understand that we are on the average, and this would be really very dangerous if we go along with any neglecting the precautions, I mean.
Yes, negligence to any kind of precautions or what the government or what the leadership and the government have been calling people to carry out with. Let me here say, yes, indeed, that the government and the leadership has been trying to put in parallel the safety of people and the health conditions in one hand, and on the other hand, the economic wheel and how to drive it and or forward it. What we are speaking about here today is how Egypt so far has dealt with the situation. We are aware that the economic repercussions on Egypt were enormous, and not just the tourism sector, rather the transportation, even the Suez Canal. Yes, it's ongoing, but because of some other factors like the oil prices and whatsoever, all these things have been affecting or reflecting on our economy in a way or another. So how have Egypt been dealing with the situation from this aspect, from protecting its own citizen and at the same time trying to avert a total collapse in its economy?
Well, the equation is very difficult. We are trying to show the world that we are on the standard. That means that Egypt is respecting all the international standards, and the World Health Organization gave excellent reports about Egypt's preparedness. But we are trying also to make the issue more clear to the world that Our economy is not like the superpowers who can afford the lockdown. Even these countries, they were harmed. So we are just emerging from a difficult situation, the war against terrorism, two revolutions. We had many industries were locked down in 2011 and afterwards. And then we started building our infrastructure. So we are just trying to emerge. As President Sisi said, this was the timing of Egypt's return to the international arena again. So I think that we have two audience, if I can call it like that, the international audience, which is the international organizations and other countries. Because let's not forget, for instance, if all the European countries and the Western countries were open again after this lockdown, and tourism...
But Spain and France are on their way to.
Exactly.
And most of the European countries are...
Italy is just hesitating a bit.
Yes.
And we are approaching summer. If these countries, they will tell their nationals, you can go abroad and visit other countries for vacations. If Egypt has high numbers, I think that they would not recommend Egypt. They will tell them, no, avoid Egypt because COVID-19 is there. So we are trying to give the excellent message.
Trust me, the Italians and the Europeans are not into this issue of going abroad in countries. They just want to get out of their own homes. Here is the picture of the Prime Minister, and we are aware that every Thursday, the Prime Minister himself, who is following up the situation, definitely along with President Sisi, who is always in contact, or who are always in meetings regarding this issue. We all know that on Thursday, from each week, we have the Prime Minister stating us facts and stages Egypt will carry out during the next week. How Egypt dealt with the world, and we have seen this call from President Sisi. No, in fact, not a call, but rather a gesture, a goodwill gesture that was made from the very, very beginning when he sent to China a shipment at this very critical times China was passing by, when he sent to Italy and then the United States and other countries. How did you see this, and how far do you think a call of unity is or has become a must at this particular stage?
Well, as I said before, if we study the character of President Sisi, he's a man who gives his word and then he makes the deeds by himself to show that he's willing to do that. For instance, he gave on Twitter and Facebook a clear message to the world that this pandemic is a crisis for humanity. And he said it clearly, if we won't do it together, we will never get out of this crisis. And then he started the shipment for China. At the time where all the countries were boycotting China, it was I don't want to say that it was like the hell on earth. Everyone said we cannot afford to contact the Chinese. And even Russia closed all the borders with China, their close allies. And then Egypt sent this shipment, and heading the minister, Dr. Hala Zaid, went by, Minister of Health, Egyptian Minister of Health, went by herself there. And then to Italy, when the numbers were very high, and President Sisi called the Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte, and he told him that we are in solidarity with you. Maybe it seemed to the world that these were just words. Well, no, President Sisi said, no, I will show you that we mean these words. And then the shipment were sent. So this is a man who was giving his word to these nations and showing them the good deeds. And he did the same thing with the United States. It's not about if these countries need our shipments or not. It's about the gesture that we are a people of a human conscience in the international community. Look, for instance, at the time that President Sisi was offering the help to all these countries, and we are in need of these shipments, but we are trying to help the people who are dying in these countries. At that time, Erdogan in Turkey was hijacking the cargo shipments of the masks and taking for its own country.
And was just speaking at this very particular issue before we start our conversation or our topic here, our discussion, and we were speaking about evidence of how the Turkish authorities are dealing with the situation in Turkey, and as the whole world is in a call for communication, for coordination, for unity, the Turkish side is taking another.
It's horrible.
Yes, first, as you said, respectively, and this I did not mention. Yes, the first when he hijacked cargoes that were going with medical supplies
To Spain.
To Spain, yes. And this was the very beginning, the first thing he did. And then after a while, he sent to Britain supplies which Britain said that they do not fit into the international criteria, and they do not really, they are not wanted. And they thanked them, and they wanted to return it back. And then how the opposition, the Turkish opposition, have been speaking, particularly one prominent figure as Ahmed Davutoglu, the former foreign minister, and how he spoke about how Turkey is dealing with the opposition at this very particular time we're speaking about. Please.
Worse than that, at this time, in the war going on in Libya, Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar asked for a ceasefire so we can keep the crisis of the COVID-19 under control and the civilians would not be harmed. And President Sisi gave the same message. At that time, Turkish airplanes and Turkish militias were killing civilians there. Imagine, at that time in Libya. So I think that the international community now have all the evidence in front of them.
Right. So let go Turkey, because Turkey is flying out of the out of any of its. Okay. When we speak about this call by President Sisi, the president has made two different calls. One to the non-aligned movement countries, and the other, a previous one, to African leaders, all through the or rather, all via video conferences. And here the president proposed an initiative to the African leaders to create a fund to provide the necessary resources to support efforts to combat the pandemic in Africa. And he also called for the world community to assist and support developing countries, plus, of course, African nations, to be able to confront this global threat. How far do you think this is needed, and how far this call came in time?
First of all, President Sisi was present in two conferences, video conferences, one of the African leaders and the other one was the non-alignment countries. And then he gave the same message to the world, especially to the superpowers. At the time, if you will find the vaccines, please don't make the cost high for the poor countries, because they won't afford it. And he made a very important and intelligent remark, saying that this will affect the investments of these countries in Africa, because they need the working hand in these countries. If they get sick, they won't find people trying to help them, or even they won't be able to invest anymore. So we are in a closed world. This is the globalization, and President Sisi gave a stern message to the international community. Beware. We have to find a vaccine to all the countries, not any laboratories for any just wealthy countries. No, it has to be for everyone. We have to find a timing on combating this pandemic so it won't last forever and our economies will collapse. And he gave also an important message about the work between all the countries, even in the time of conflict. That means that he said we have to put aside all these conflicts. Of course, we have the war against terrorism, but at certain time, the war, for example, in Yemen, the civilians are paying a heavy price in all aspects by the Houthis there and the presence of militias there, and they have the cholera and they have the COVID-19. So this is an example of it. We have to help these countries in order to make them protected as we are protecting our civilians. So the most important message is that finance should not be the second weapon that will kill the people, meaning they have the COVID-19 and then they won't afford the money. So I think that the African nations, there is, well, some experts are saying there's some danger about it, that they don't have the equipment of measuring and the assessment of the COVID-19.
You mean here the detectors, the
yes,
thermometer detectors?
Yes, yes. And this is not about the poor countries only, because Spain at the beginning, they had 70,000 equipment that didn't work. It was fake. So it's dangerous, even the superpowers. And the
we're speaking here about the detectors, or are we speaking about the PCR? Or what are we speaking about?
The detectors,
right,
yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
it has to be in the hand of everyone. It cannot be only for wealthy countries,
Yes,
because
indeed.
it will kill everyone afterwards.
Yes. Before we continue on with our discussion, let's have this second report. And the Chinese ambassador in Egypt said that his country has always been supporting the economic and social development in Egypt, adding that under the leadership of both countries, China and Egypt, will work together to finally overcome the pandemic. In this context, and in a move to return the favor, China handed Egypt a shipment of medical aid. This is the second shipment aid by China. Definitely that was a kind of return back to what Egypt has sent at the very beginning of this crisis. Let's watch this report. China's ambassador to Egypt has attended an event to hand the Egyptian side another 4.7-ton shipment of medical aid from China, including face masks and protective suits. The shipment includes 10,000 N95 respirators, masks, 10,000 protective suits, 70,000 DNA detectors. Ambassador Liao Liqing said in a Twitter post that China and Egypt are good friends and that China supports the Egyptian efforts to combat coronavirus and is confident that Egypt will overcome it soon. He also noted that Egypt has provided firm support to China in a crucial stage for its fight against coronavirus, adding that now China has contained the epidemic and has provided aid to Egypt to the best of its ability to return the favor. The Chinese ambassador also said that China will provide further aid to Egypt in the future. The ambassador announced that a massive batch is being coordinated with the Egyptian government. That batch will encompass 150,000 masks, 1 million masks for medical staff, 70,000 medical protective suits, 70,000 COVID-19 test kits, and 1,000 thermometers guns. Liu Qiang revealed that the medical aid will be handed over to the university hospitals affiliated to Egypt's Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research. Right, welcome back. And Dr. Amir, as you saw here the report, and this is a shipment from China returning the favor, or what their ambassador said was returning the favor, or in return of what Egypt did at the very beginning. Here, when we speak about locally and how Egypt dealt, because I really like this piece of information, how Egypt took care of the foreigners who were stranded here on its territories and provided them with all means of care, and how they wanted to stay in Egypt. The issue here is how Egypt dealt with its people and how Egypt dealt with even visitors.
Well, the visitors we have seen at the beginning, many foreigners were in Egypt, especially from Italy and from Great Britain. and of course French citizens also, but these two nationalities were present in Sharm el-Sheikh, present in Luxor and Aswan, and we know that some cases were reported positive at that time. And this was the heavy task upon the Egyptian Health Ministry, and we had to not abandon these people and then kick them out. No, we showed them all the hospitality. We opened our hospitals. Any other country would have told them, well, leave the country immediately. We didn't do that. This has to be put into account. We opened our hospitals for them. Even there was some Americans also COVID-19 positive, and we started dealing. At the time, there was no idea about the vaccines. No one knew about it. We started trying to figure out how we can overcome this. Fortunately, thank God, no one died here on Egypt's soil. They all, some of them managed to go back in moderate condition, and others were healed. Yeah. And then when we closed our airspace, we decided to contact the foreign ministry in Great Britain and in Germany and France and Italy, telling them, you can, of course, get your planes here in Egypt and take the people, your people, if you wish to. And they did so. Mm-hmm. That's why the favor, this was, we can say, it's in the international community, international law, the reciprocity on the Egyptians abroad asked to come back. All the countries who had locked down gave the permission to the Egyptians and to the Egypt Air. And thanks also to the directions are given by President Sisi to our Minister of Civil Aviation, who by himself aboarded these planes and went to London, to Paris, to Berlin, and even to New York, where the hub of all these pandemic. He went by himself there, and we managed to return our citizens. So if we would not had done this from the beginning, I think that Egyptians would have been lost there and being panicked. So this is a kind of visionary diplomacy. We knew that our people, our citizens, would like to come back, so we offered the hand like that. And this had a very positive impression in the souls of the Egyptians, that their government, for the first time, is recognizing them abroad and protecting them abroad. An Egyptian outside is protected by his government. Yeah. And the same thing, when we are answering your question about the health here in Egypt, we are doing the best, because the capacity, as you have seen, all outside Egypt, even in Europe, they're overwhelmed. They are trying to find a way to get out of this crisis. We are doing the same. We're trying to do the best. Yeah. But we are asking the people, we understand you want to work, you want to gain your daily bread, but you have to respect the precautions. It will avoid us a lot.
Particularly this issue that you've been speaking about, and how Egypt dealt with people who were stranded outside or abroad, and about how we returned them, and how the Egyptian Foreign Ministry played in coordination with all other institutions, have played a great role in returning those people. How far do you think that this or the Foreign Ministry, along with different institutions, the Health Ministry and all the concerned authorities, have dealt with the situation of returning back our Egyptians, and how with regard to other nations or our states, and how they did with their own people?
Look, as I said, this we can call it the visionary diplomacy. Look, at the beginning, if we go back months or maybe years before, President Sisi made several visits to the Balkans, for example, to Romania, to Belarus, and then everyone asked why we're targeting these countries. And then at the time we said because we want to have a good reputation within the EU. Well, Belarus is not in the EU, but Romania is. So I think that we have laid the foundation of the correct diplomacy, the honest diplomacy. At the time, diplomacy is not always about war. It's also about humanity and human crisis. Every country outside of Egypt had the total right not to open their airspace, and they had the right to deny us access. But thanks to the diplomacy that we were doing from the beginning, they said, well, Egypt has a good reputation. We can let them come and take their people. Why I'm speaking about the visits of President Sisi to Romania and all these countries? Because it has another benefit also, economically. Why? Because at the time that all the shipments of all the grains, they were stopped by the EU, and they said there will be no shipments. The only exception was to Egypt, and we had all what we needed from all the grains that we need, and we gave the agricultural products also. Also, replying to your question, answering your question about what other countries have done to their citizens. Well, I think that every country, they're doing their best. We cannot judge other countries, except the dictatorships like Turkey, for example. They don't care about their own people. They throw them in prison if they're not happy. That's it. But other countries, friendly countries, like our partners in the EU, are doing the best they can. And they sent really the airplanes to take their citizens, although everyone abandoned Italy at the time in the EU, and the Schengen was closed, although this was the foundation of the EU. What's the use of the Schengen if you close at the time of crisis? It has to be open. It has to, access has to be available to all the countries to help each other. For example, the French send their citizens to get the treatment in Germany and in Switzerland, but the Italians couldn't do that at that time. And the Russians, fortunately, came in their aid and they helped them. And Egypt sent also. So that's why I'm saying the geopolitical situation post-COVID-19 would be totally different from before. And each position, even, God forbid, will be hurt by the COVID-19. I think that in the international community, we have an asset. And they know that Egypt is an honest country and honest partner.
But we are.
Of course.
But we are. Truly we are. We are an honest partner. We are an honest partner.
President Sisi said it. He said, we are the honest people at the time that honesty is nowhere anymore.
When we, let's return back to our episode, and repercussions, as we've been speaking on the world economy, has been enormous and tremendous. And here Egypt did not go through an economic crisis yet. See, it seems like the economic programs or plans or reform programs that we have been going through gave us a kind of lifeline, give us the ability to breathe before, or at least we did not nosedive, our economy did not nosedive during the past period, thank God. So how far do you think these programs have gave us this lifeline? How far do you think that Egypt is dealing economically?
It's also about the visionary planning. President Sisi, from the beginning, he understood that at the time, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, we don't know, the oil production will harm the people who are benefiting from it. And this is what we saw lately. Even the United States, we have seen the collapse in front of our eyes in 24 hours. So we had the assets of other means of production. When we started working about the infrastructure, because we said at a certain time that many countries, when they will have some lockdown or economic crisis, they will find the alternative. And for the EU, for example, the most close alternative is Egypt. Look in North Africa. We are the only country bordering the Mediterranean, south of the EU. We are the only country producing the agriculture elements that Europe is needing now, the gas. We are having the electricity. So we had the auto-sufficient elements that gave us the preparedness. And I think that this is also thanks to our military institution that took care of us after the revolution of June 30th, 2013, because the military has always the planning that we have to be prepared. We have to be prepared for the worst. And I think this plan was late at the time, the foundation was laid. At the time that some people were criticizing why is the army is participating in that. Look now in Europe, the armies were deployed in the streets to take, we have seen in Italy, taking the coffins and trying to disinfect the regions, and even the Russians, when they went to Italy, they sent the military, the biological warfare specialists. So this means that the military institute was very cautious at the beginning of Egypt's crisis, that we have to be prepared. And let me say, the crises are not over, because we know that at the time there will be an economic collapse in other countries, there will always be some turmoil. God forbid, maybe wars, but I don't know. But this means that you have to be always prepared to the worst. So Egypt laid the foundation for that. We are using our proper elements. We are not waiting for tourism. Of course, it's a very important element, but who could have imagined that Egypt will close its airspace and would not have a single tourist and still would live on? If you get back in 20 years, this would have been a nightmare. We survived, thank God. We survived, but this is because of the planning of President Sisi and all the military institute. Be prepared to the worst. And I don't want to be a pessimist, but I think the worst is coming also, because look, be realistic. After COVID-19, things won't be the same, and it won't be very good outside. And the competition between China and the United States is heating up, and they want to settle some accounts. And I think that many countries will pay a price.
Yes. And from this perspective, I only have here a minute and a half that is left for me. And how far, as you said, that the coming is unforeseen.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know. We don't know what is the coming, how dangerous it is, and what would be the next upcoming crises, and or the repercussions even of what we are in right now. So how far has the call for unity among humanity has become a must? We're not speaking now about different nations, we're not speaking about different continents, we're speaking about human beings, just human beings. How far has this unity become a must?
Well, let me be more, maybe some, in a way or another, spiritual. Maybe it's a call from heaven, a call from God, that humanity, we are all the same. All religions are calling upon God to lift this pandemic. People are examining themselves, trying to be in union. But let's say that, unfortunately, what is taking place now in all the world is always the economy, the power, the money, who's controlling everything. And the people are just paying the price. So here in Egypt, fortunately, we have a leadership that's believing in God very strongly, and we believe in God, and we hope that we will overcome this crisis.
Yeah. Well, when it's not just in Egypt, I hope the whole world would return to this.
I hope so.
To this call of humanity. Dr. Cherif Amir, Professor of International Relations, we thank you so much for being with us tonight, and definitely
all the hopes for us to, all the world, to overcome what we're in. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, many thanks for watching. Tomorrow will be another important debate with another colleague. Good night.